Henry VIII is not a name that you would readily associate with healing the sick and saving lives. Indeed, quite the opposite is likely to be your first thought when you think of the 6 times married monarch whose contribution to medical science consisted in most people's minds of the separation of heads from their bodies. Yet it is to Henry that London owes the survival of its oldest hospital, St. Bartholomew's, or Barts, as it has been affectionately known to generations of Londoners. Founded in 1123, along with the long-vanished Priory of St. Bartholomew and the still-standing nearby church of St. Bartholomew the Great, the hospital developed a good reputation for, if not always actually curing the sick, then certainly for making their afflictions that little bit more bearable. Patients were nursed, given rest and comfort, not to mention a reasonable amount of food, together with a goodly amount of ale, and if or when a patient was discharged, they would be sent on their way with a fine pair of new shoes that had been crafted in the monastery's own tannery. Imagine getting all that on the NHS. And then, in 1534, Henry VIII went and almost ruined it all by declaring himself supreme head of the Church in England and setting in motion the dissolution of the monasteries. The Priory of St. Bartholomew was suppressed in 1539, and the hospital would no doubt have followed suit, had not the city fathers panicked at the prospect of the invisible poor that the hospital had done a pretty good job of keeping hidden from their view, becoming the all too visible poor and a firm fixture of everyday life in the city of London. So in 1538 they petitioned Henry, urging that he grant the hospital back to the city on account of the fact it was urgently needed to help, and I quote, the miserable people lying in the streets, offending every clean person passing by the way with their filthy and nasty savours. In short, what the city fathers were saying, I think, was that the poor tended to be somewhat dirty and were prone to smell. It took a bit more appealing to Henry's extremely well-hidden, caring and considerate side, not to mention a few false starts, before on the 27th of December 1546 he finally granted the hospital formerly known as St. Bartholomew's to the City of London. However, he was most insistent that the name be changed to the far catchier House of the Poor in West Smithfield, in the suburbs of the City of London, of King Henry VIII's foundation. Officially speaking, this remained the hospital's actual name until 1948, although generations of Londoners chose to ignore such a grandiose title in favour of just plain Barts. Still, Henry had done right by the hospital, so the hospital felt duty-bound to do right by Henry, albeit it took them almost 200 years to show their appreciation. In 1701, the hospital's governors decided that the North Gate should be rebuilt, and in 1702 they agreed to pay Edward Strong Jr. the princely sum of £550 to erect a splendid new North Gate for them. When it came to building, Edward Strong possessed impeccable family credentials, being a member of a notable family of stonemasons. His uncle, Thomas Strong, was one of the master masons who had worked with Sir Christopher Wren on the rebuilding of St. Paul's Cathedral. Indeed, it was Thomas Strong that laid the foundation stone of the new cathedral on the 21st of June 1675. Following Thomas's untimely and sudden death in June 1681, his brother Edward took his place, and fittingly it was reputedly he who placed the last stone on the lantern of the new cathedral on the 26th of October 1708. Edward Strong Jr. was Edward Strong Sr.'s son, and so the hospital governors no doubt felt that they had made a first-rate selection in their choice of builder for their fancy new North Gate. And Edward didn't disappoint. although he did prove himself extremely adept at the age-old guiding principle of the building fraternity by going way over budget, and by the time of the gate's completion in the late spring of 1703, the cost had risen from the initial £550 to an eye-watering £2,813. Over the arch of the gate was placed a statue of Henry VIII, the despotic monarch who, for all his faults, was responsible for ensuring that the hospital survived his break with Rome and could continue to administer to the sick of London, a task it is still performing to this day. The statue was the work of Sir Francis Bird, and it is London's only statue of Henry VIII in an outdoor public place. He stands proud and regal, one hand resting on his dagger and the other hand holding a sceptre, although the sceptre, along with the crown that perches incongruously atop of his head, only dates from 1987. And since it is a visible and notable feature, it would be remiss of me not to mention the decidedly exaggerated codpiece that adorns the statue's nether regions. Above Henry are two weathered and scantily draped reclining male figures, which represent lameness and disease. The one on the left, which I presume to be disease, has one arm in a sling, and his legs are crossed in a somewhat uncomfortable manner, giving the impression that his left leg is floating in the air. Lameness holds a crutch, and his head and visible leg are bandaged. Above the central window that separates them are two crossed crutches adorned with fruit, flowers, and corn. There is an inscription over the gate which reads, St. Bartholomew's Hospital, founded by Rahir, anno 1102, refounded by King Henry VIII, 1546. This front was rebuilt anno 1702 in the first year of Queen Anne. Sir William Pritchard, Knight and Alderman, President, John Nicol, Esquire, Treasurer. There is a slight error in the inscription, as the hospital was in fact founded by Rahir in 1123, not in 1102. Although, in fairness to whoever carved it, their source was John Stow, who in his 1598 book, A Survey of London, written in the year 1598, states that the priory was founded in about the year of Christ 1102, and there was no Wikipedia back in 1703 to enable a quick fact check before you put hammer to chisel. But when all's said and done, this is a minor mistake in an otherwise faultless creation, and if I'm to be perfectly honest about it, I feel somewhat churlish for even mentioning it. This magnificent gatehouse is still the main entrance to the hospital, and through it pass patients, staff and visitors alike, day in and day out, just as they have done for over 300 years. How many of them ever stop to admire its exquisite ornamentation, or to consider the fact that such a rich and graceful structure that would not be out of place at the threshold of a palace or stately home was in fact built as the entrance from the street to a hospital for the poor? How many of those who pass through it ever notice the proud and regal figure, resplendent with his decidedly exaggerating codpiece, that gazes out across Smithfield from his lofty perch, and consider the fact that they are looking at the only outdoor statue of King Henry VIII in the whole of London? But they are, and it is, and that's all.